6 years ago, I watched my sister take the man I loved away from me at our father's funeral. 6 years later, I watched that same man step out of a black limousine in front of her entire charity gala, and the look on my sister's face told me something I already knew. She had no idea what was coming. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 38 years old, and for most of my life, my younger sister Madison was the daughter everyone noticed, while I was the daughter everyone expected to understand. That night, inside an elegant hotel ballroom in Boston, Madison had just introduced me to a group of wealthy donors as her quiet older sister. Then she smiled and added, "Claire keeps things simple. Her husband has a regular office job, so she doesn't really understand this world." A few people gave polite laughs. I smiled too. Not because it was funny, because I knew something she didn't. Then the ballroom doors opened. A black limousine pulled up outside the glass entrance. The hotel staff suddenly became alert. Several executives stood from their tables, and Daniel Bennett walked inside. My husband. The man Madison had once claimed belonged with her. He wore a dark tailored suit, and the event director hurried toward him with both hands extended. "Mr. Bennett, we're honored to have you here." Madison stopped smiling. She stared at him as if she'd seen a ghost. Daniel was the principal investor behind the largest anonymous donation of the evening, and he had never told Madison who that donor was. If you enjoy stories about family betrayal, hidden truths, and people finally finding the courage to walk away, stay with me, because what happened that night only makes sense when you know what happened 6 years earlier. To understand why my sister's expression mattered so much to me, I have to take you back to the beginning. My father, Robert Bennett, owned a successful regional construction company. My mother, Evelyn, cared deeply about appearances, and Madison, my younger sister, understood appearances better than anyone I'd ever known. She was beautiful, outgoing, confident, and effortlessly social. She could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with everyone remembering her name. I was different. I was quieter. I liked books, numbers, and long conversations that didn't need an audience. I often helped Dad organize paperwork at the kitchen table while Madison was out with friends. Dad trusted me. I knew that because he would sometimes slide a folder across the table and say, "Tell me what you think, Claire." Those moments meant more to me than expensive gifts ever could. Mom saw things differently. Madison received beautiful clothes, jewelry, and attention. I received praise for being understanding. When Madison made a mistake, Mom called it youthful. When I made one, it became another reason I needed to be more careful. I learned early that our family had an invisible ranking. Madison was the daughter everyone protected. I was the daughter everyone expected to absorb the damage. Then, during college, I met Daniel. He wasn't wealthy. He was building a small software company with 2 friends and spending more hours working than sleeping. But he listened to me. He made me laugh, and when my father met him, Dad saw something familiar in him. Quiet determination. Madison noticed that too. And for the first time, I began to wonder whether being the daughter who stayed in the background had made me invisible to everyone, except the 2 men who mattered most to me. I didn't know then that one of them would die, and the other would become the center of the worst betrayal of my life. My father died 3 weeks before his 63rd birthday. There was no warning that prepared me for it. One day, I was sitting beside him in his hospital room, listening to him complain about the coffee, and the next, I was standing in a funeral home choosing flowers, while my mother argued about which photograph would look best on the memorial table. I remember looking at that photograph. Dad was smiling in it. Madison had chosen it because she said he looked successful. I hated that word. Successful. That wasn't what I saw when I looked at my father. I saw the man who used to wait in the driveway when I came home late from college. The man who taught me how to read a contract before signing it. The man who once told me, "Claire, never let anyone convince you that being quiet means you don't know your worth." I held on to those words because I needed them. At the funeral, Daniel stayed beside me. He didn't try to fix anything. He simply stayed. When people came to offer condolences, he handled the small things I couldn't think about. Water, phone calls, food I couldn't eat. At one point, when I finally broke down in a hallway outside the chapel, Daniel put his hand on my shoulder. "I'm here," he whispered. I believed him. That was before Madison began moving through the funeral like she was managing a business event. She spoke to relatives. She greeted Dad's clients. She made sure everyone saw her standing beside Mom. And every time she passed me, there was something unreadable in her expression. I didn't understand it then. I thought she was grieving. I was wrong. The first strange thing happened that afternoon. I was standing near the kitchen when Madison walked past me and said quietly, "You should talk to Daniel." I looked at her. "About what?" She smiled. "About what you've been planning." My stomach tightened. "What are you talking about?" She shrugged. "Nothing. Forget it." Then she walked away. I remember standing there with a paper cup of untouched coffee in my hand, wondering what she meant. I didn't know that Madison had already started telling people a story about me. A story in which I was the selfish daughter, the difficult girlfriend, the woman who planned to leave Daniel, and because everyone already believed Madison was the daughter who knew how to handle things, her version traveled faster than the truth ever could. After the funeral, I stopped going to family dinners. I stopped answering group messages, and most importantly, I stopped begging anyone to understand me. I found a small apartment across town and took a position in financial operations at a technology company. At first, I was simply trying to survive. But numbers made sense to me, in a way people didn't. Contracts had language, budgets had limits, risk could be measured. People were much harder. My manager noticed that I could find problems other employees overlooked. A vendor would hide an unfavorable clause inside a 30-page agreement, and I'd find it. A project would appear profitable until I examined the numbers, and I'd explain exactly where the money was disappearing. Within 2 years, I was managing major operational accounts. Within 4, I had become a senior operations director. I never told my family. They assumed I was struggling. That assumption became useful. Whenever Mom asked how I was doing, I'd say, "I'm fine." Whenever Madison posted photographs of expensive dinners or charity events, I didn't react. Then I saw something I hadn't expected. A photograph of Madison and Daniel together. They looked happy, or at least Madison wanted everyone to think they were. I stared at the picture for several seconds before closing my phone. I didn't call Daniel. I didn't send Madison a message. I didn't ask why. I had already learned something painful. You cannot force someone to choose the truth. But what I didn't know was that the photograph would eventually disappear. Because less than a year after my father's funeral, Daniel ended things with Madison. I heard about it through a cousin who called me late one evening. "Claire," she said carefully, "Daniel and Madison aren't together anymore." I sat silently on my couch. "Why?" "I don't know. He said there were contradictions." Contradictions. That word stayed with me. Because I knew exactly what contradictions she meant. Those screenshots. The messages Madison had shown Daniel. The messages supposedly proving that I wanted to leave him. I had always known something about them was wrong, but I had never been able to prove it. So I said nothing. I continued building my life. I saved money. I invested carefully. Eventually, I bought a modest home of my own. Nothing flashy. Nothing my family would have photographed for social media. But it was mine. Every room represented something I had done without asking anyone's permission. And then, one afternoon, I received a message from Helen Bennett. Helen had been my father's attorney for years. She asked if I could meet her for coffee. I almost said no. I didn't know it then, but that coffee meeting would be the first time someone finally gave the truth a place to breathe. The coffee shop Helen chose was small and quiet, tucked between a bookstore and an old brick office building. When I walked in, she was already sitting by the window. There were 2 cups on the table. Helen looked up at me and smiled. "You look tired." "I am." She pushed the second cup toward me. "Black coffee." "No sugar." I almost smiled. "Dad told you?" "He told me everything." That sentence made my chest tighten. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Helen reached into her leather bag and placed a thin folder on the table. "I've been holding on to something for 6 years. I didn't touch it." "What is it?" "Records from your father's office." I looked at her. "Why?" Because your father was worried about Madison. I felt my shoulders stiffen. Helen continued carefully. He never accused her of anything, but he told me she had become very concerned with how the family looked to other people. I stared at the folder. That's not exactly news. No, Helen said, but there was something else. She opened it. Inside were copies of correspondence connected to Daniel's company, emails, business letters, old meeting notes. Nothing looked dramatic, but Helen wasn't finished. Your father kept unusually organized records. When Daniel became involved with Madison after the funeral, I started noticing inconsistencies in the story. I swallowed. The screenshots? Helen nodded. I never had the original phone, Claire, so I couldn't tell you they were fake, but I knew the timeline didn't make sense. I finally touched the folder. Why didn't you tell me? Because you were grieving. And because I didn't want to give you another reason to stay trapped in that family. Her words hurt because they were true. I didn't want Daniel back, I said quietly. Helen looked directly at me. I know. That was why I trusted her. She wasn't trying to push me toward revenge. She wasn't telling me to call Daniel. She simply wanted me to know that my memory wasn't broken. Someone else had noticed the cracks too. Before we left, Helen made me promise one thing. If you ever find something that proves what happened, don't destroy it because you're angry. I nodded. Truth doesn't need anger, she said. It needs somewhere safe to exist. I didn't understand why those words mattered so much. Not yet. Because a few weeks later, Daniel contacted Helen, and eventually, he contacted me. Our first conversation lasted almost 2 hours. There were apologies. Long silences. Questions neither of us wanted to ask. Daniel admitted he had believed the screenshots because Madison had shown them while he was grieving and convinced him that I had been planning to leave. I should have asked you, he said. Yes, I answered. He didn't defend himself. That mattered. Over the months that followed, we slowly rebuilt what had been broken. There was no dramatic reunion, no instant forgiveness, just coffee, conversations, long walks, and the uncomfortable work of learning who we were after 6 years of living separate lives. Eventually, Daniel asked me to marry him. We had a small ceremony, no family announcement, no photographs posted online, no explanation to Madison. We simply chose each other quietly, and for the first time in my life, I understood that privacy could be peaceful. Then, 6 years after my father's funeral, an invitation arrived. Madison was hosting a major charity gala at an upscale Boston hotel. The invitation was embossed in gold. Mom called before I could even decide whether to attend. You're coming, she said. I don't think so. Claire, it's important. The whole family will be there. I almost laughed. The whole family being there is exactly why I don't want to go. Her voice hardened. Don't make everything about the past. I stared at the invitation. I wanted to throw it away. Instead, I put it on the kitchen counter. That evening, Daniel found me looking at it. You don't have to go, he said. I know. He sat beside me. Then he said something that made me look up. I think you should. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Because I have a reason for wanting to be there. I studied his face. What reason? You'll find out. I didn't like surprises, especially when they involved my family. But there was something different in Daniel's voice, something deliberate, and when I arrived at the hotel weeks later, I immediately understood that he had planned something. Madison had placed me at a small table near the back of the ballroom. She greeted me with a polished smile. Claire, I'm glad you came. Her eyes traveled over my dress. Then she leaned closer. You've done well for yourself. I knew that tone. It wasn't praise. It was assessment. Mom approached next. Please don't make tonight uncomfortable. I looked at her. I wasn't planning to. Good. She squeezed my arm. Madison has worked very hard for this. I looked across the ballroom. Madison was surrounded by donors, board members, and family friends. She looked exactly like the daughter my mother had always wanted. Then Madison raised her glass. The room began settling into silence. She was about to speak about Dad, about the family, about the legacy she claimed she had protected. And I suddenly had the strange feeling that 6 years after destroying my life, Madison was about to make the same mistake again, Only this time, I wasn't the woman she remembered. Madison took the microphone. She stood beneath the warm hotel lights with one hand resting lightly against the podium, smiling as if the entire ballroom belonged to her. "Thank you all for being here," she began. "My father believed family was everything." I felt my stomach tighten. Dad had believed that. But Madison had always had a very different definition of family. She spoke about his construction company, his generosity, and the difficult years after his death. She made herself sound like the daughter who had carried everyone through the hardest days. Then her eyes found me. "And sometimes," she said, "family members need more time than others to understand what loss means." A few people turned toward me. Madison smiled. "My sister Claire has always been very sensitive. After Dad died, she disappeared. She couldn't handle everything that happened." My hands stayed folded in my lap. I knew exactly where this was going. Madison continued. She was heartbroken, especially after Daniel realized that their relationship wasn't right for either of them. The room became uncomfortable. Someone shifted in their chair. My mother sat near the front, completely still. Then she added the sentence I had heard in different forms for 6 years. Madison saved Daniel from making a terrible mistake. There it was. The old story. The same lie. Only now, it was being told to a ballroom full of strangers. I felt something inside me go quiet. Not broken. Quiet. Madison turned toward the event director. "We're also incredibly grateful for tonight's largest donation. It represents what this foundation has accomplished and how much confidence people have in our work." I knew who had made that donation. Daniel. A family friend leaned toward me. "Is your husband coming tonight?" Before I could answer, Madison laughed softly. "Oh, Claire's husband is probably working somewhere ordinary." A few people smiled politely. Madison looked pleased with herself. I looked at her and said, "I think you should wait until you know who you're thanking." Her smile froze. "What does that mean?" "Nothing," I said. And I meant it, because I wasn't going to explain. Not yet. Then the ballroom doors opened. The sound of conversation faded almost instantly. Several executives stood. I turned. A black limousine had stopped outside the hotel entrance. The rear door opened. Daniel stepped out. He wore a dark, tailored suit I'd seen him wear only once before. He walked through the entrance with the calm confidence of someone who had no reason to explain himself. The event director hurried toward him. "Mr. Bennett, welcome." Madison stared. Daniel shook hands with several executives. Then the director announced, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "Everyone, I'd like you to welcome Daniel Bennett, whose company is responsible for tonight's principal contribution." Silence. Madison's face changed. She looked at me, then at Daniel, then back at me. The man she had once described as someone she had saved was standing in front of her as a highly successful businessman, but money wasn't the real surprise. Daniel walked straight toward me. He kissed my forehead. "Hi, Claire." "Hi." Madison looked like she couldn't breathe. But then I noticed something else. Daniel wasn't alone. Helen had entered behind him. She carried a thin leather folder against her chest. Daniel looked at me. "Are you ready?" I glanced at Helen, then at the ballroom, then at Madison. For 6 years, I had imagined what it would feel like to finally prove that I hadn't betrayed Daniel. I had imagined anger. I had imagined shouting. But standing there, I felt strangely calm, because I wasn't trying to win Daniel back. I already had him. Helen placed the folder on the table. "Claire," she said quietly, "these are the records we've been preserving." I opened it. Inside were copies of archived emails, dated messages, an old phone backup, and correspondence from the weeks surrounding my father's funeral. My heart began beating faster. Daniel sat beside me. "I found the contradictions months after the funeral," he said, "but I didn't know how to prove everything at first." Helen pointed to the first page. "The original messages don't match the screenshots Madison showed him." I stared at the screen captures, then at the archived versions. The wording was different, the dates were different, and several screenshots had clearly been altered. For 6 years, I had wondered whether I had somehow failed to explain myself. Now I was looking at proof that I had never needed to explain anything. Madison had changed the story, and this time, she couldn't change the records. Daniel reached for my hand. "I should have asked you," he whispered. I looked at him. "Yes," I said. He nodded. "I know." And for the first time, I understood why he had brought Helen. The truth wasn't coming from me alone. It was coming with documents, dates, preserved records, and the person who had quietly believed something was wrong, long before anyone else did. I closed the folder. Then I looked toward the microphone Madison was still holding. I knew what I had to do. I walked toward the microphone. Every step felt strangely ordinary. My shoes touched the ballroom floor. Someone moved a chair out of my way. A waiter stopped beside a table with a tray of untouched champagne glasses. Nobody spoke. Madison still stood behind the podium. Her fingers tightened around the microphone. "Claire," she said quietly, "what are you doing?" I looked at her. For once, I'm going to tell the truth. I took the microphone from her. My voice was calm. 6 years ago, at Dad's funeral, Madison told everyone that I had planned to leave Daniel. She showed him messages that appeared to come from me. Madison immediately shook her head. "That isn't what happened. I didn't raise my voice. The messages weren't mine." A murmur moved through the room. Madison looked toward Mom. "Mom, tell her." My mother stood halfway. "Claire, this isn't the place." It became the place when Madison used this room to tell everyone a lie about me. That stopped her. I opened the folder. Helen stepped beside me. "These are archived copies of the original communications," she said. "They were preserved from multiple sources." Daniel stood a few feet behind us. His expression was serious. "I reviewed them myself," he said. "The messages Claire supposedly sent weren't the original messages." Madison stared at him. "You're doing this to punish me." Daniel shook his head. "No. I'm taking responsibility for what I did." That sentence changed the room. He looked at me. "I believed you had betrayed me, because I trusted someone else's evidence more than I trusted the woman I loved." His voice cracked slightly. "I was wrong." Nobody interrupted him. Madison stepped away from the podium. "You're lying." Helen opened another document. "Then explain this." She showed Madison the archived version of one of the messages. The date was different, the wording was different, and the message Madison had shown Daniel did not exist in the original record. Madison stared at the page. Her face slowly lost its color. "You don't understand," she whispered. I looked at her. "Then explain it." She said nothing. I waited. Finally, Madison's voice broke. "I thought you were going to marry him." I felt my chest tighten. "You already had me out of the way," she continued. "Everyone always chose you when Dad was involved. He listened to you. Daniel listened to you. I was tired of being second." There it was. Not a misunderstanding, not grief, jealousy. She had wanted what I had because she believed attention was something people could steal. Mom immediately stepped forward. She was grieving too. I turned toward her. "Mom, you didn't have to choose me." The room became completely silent. "You only had to ask me what happened." My mother looked down. I turned back toward Madison. "You didn't steal my future. You stole 6 years from me, and I won't give you another one." Madison began crying. "Are you really going to destroy the family over something that happened 6 years ago?" I shook my head. "No." I looked around the ballroom. "The lie did that. I'm only refusing to carry it anymore." I handed the microphone back. There was no applause. I didn't need one. For the first time, the silence didn't feel like rejection. It felt like the truth had finally been given enough room to exist. The consequences began quietly. Several donors approached the charity board members that evening. They asked questions about Madison's leadership and whether the foundation's public claims would be independently reviewed. The board did not remove her immediately. Instead, they announced that an independent review would be conducted. Daniel also made his position clear. He would not provide additional funding until the review was complete. Madison had spent years believing that status protected her. Now she was learning that reputation could disappear much faster than it was built. My mother called me before I even reached the hotel parking lot. "How could you embarrass your sister like that?" I stopped walking. She embarrassed herself. She was under pressure. So was I. There was silence. Then Mom said, "Family should forgive." I closed my eyes. Forgiveness isn't the same as pretending. I ended the call. Daniel was waiting beside the limousine. He opened the door for me. As I got inside, I looked back at the hotel. 6 years earlier, I had left my father's funeral, believing my life had been taken from me. Tonight, I left knowing something different. Nobody had to punish Madison. Her own choices had finally become visible, and that was enough. But as the limousine pulled away from the curb, my phone began vibrating again. One message from my mother, then another, then one from Madison. They weren't finished with me. Not yet. The messages kept coming. My mother wanted to meet. Madison wanted to clear the air. A cousin sent me a message that said, "Family is family. Don't let one bad night ruin everything." I stared at that sentence for a long time. One bad night. As if 6 years could be reduced to one evening. As if the funeral hadn't happened. As if I hadn't spent years wondering why the people who knew me best had believed the worst about me without asking a single question. Madison's apology was longer. She said she had been under pressure. She said she was young. She said she had felt invisible. But somehow, every paragraph still ended with what she needed from me. Forgiveness. Silence. Another chance. I didn't answer. My mother eventually asked me to meet her. I agreed, but only at a quiet cafe downtown. When she arrived, she looked older than I remembered. "I don't want to lose both of my daughters," she said. I stirred my coffee. "You're not losing me, Mom. I'm just not going back to the way things were." She looked down. I protected Madison because she needed it. I finally met her eyes. Protecting someone doesn't mean protecting them from consequences. She started crying. "I wish you'd understand." "I do understand." My voice stayed calm. But understanding why someone hurt me doesn't mean I have to keep giving them opportunities to do it again. I told her my boundaries. No insults disguised as jokes. No rewriting what happened at Dad's funeral. No surprise visits. No pressure to attend Madison's events. And no asking me to sacrifice my peace so the family could look whole from the outside. Mom nodded slowly. It wasn't reconciliation. Not yet. Maybe it never would be. But for the first time, I wasn't making my choices based on whether my family approved of them. I was making them because I finally approved of myself. Months passed. Madison's charity survived after an independent review and restructuring, but she no longer controlled every part of its public image. I didn't celebrate that. I didn't need to. Daniel and I returned to our quiet life. Our home was comfortable, our circle was small, and our marriage belonged to us, instead of becoming another competition inside my family. My career continued growing too. I began preparing to launch my own consulting practice, helping small businesses improve their operations and financial systems. Helen remained in my life. Not because she had saved me, because she had believed me without demanding anything in return. Sometimes I thought about that limousine. For a few minutes, it had looked like the perfect revenge. Madison had spent years believing she had taken the better life. Then my husband stepped out of that car and shattered the story she had built. But eventually, I understood something. The limousine wasn't the victory. Daniel wasn't the victory. The money wasn't the victory. The victory happened much earlier, when I stopped begging people to believe me. 6 years ago, I thought losing Daniel meant I had lost everything. Now I know I lost something else that day. I lost the version of myself who thought love had to be earned through obedience, silence, and family approval. And I found someone stronger. Someone who could walk away. Someone who could forgive without returning. Someone who could love her family from a distance, if distance was what peace required. If you've ever been the person your family expected to stay quiet, I hope you remember this. You don't have to keep proving your worth to people who benefit from misunderstanding you. Sometimes the healthiest ending isn't getting revenge. It's finally building a life they can no longer control. If this story reminded you of something you've lived through, share your experience in the comments. And if you want more stories about family betrayal, boundaries, and finding your way back to yourself, subscribe. Because sometimes the moment you think you've lost everything is actually the moment your real life begins.